You know, beheadings, when they happen out in the middle of the desert by ISIS terrorists, are one thing. But when a state like Saudi Arabia has a beheading, you begin to wonder what's going on. So Robert Spencer joins us, director of Jihad Watch. Robert, this is a story of a lady who had been convicted in Saudi Arabia of both sexual abuse and murder of her 7-year-old stepdaughter. She was publicly beheaded. What's up?
Well, this is something that happens not infrequently in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, of course, is a Sharia state. It adheres fully to Islamic law. And that kind of crime is considered to be causing corruption in the land, which is punishable by death. Beheading, of course, is sanctioned in the Quran in 2 places, chapter 8, verse 12, and chapter 47, verse 4. And so they consider themselves to be acting completely in accord with Islamic dictates in beheading this woman.
There are actually 2 ways to behead, according to the rules in Saudi Arabia. One's with painkillers, one's not. They purposely didn't give this lady painkillers so that she felt more pain. This is barbaric.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. This whole Islamic law is barbaric in numerous ways. I mean, for example, I mentioned causing corruption in the land, and chapter 5, verse 33 of the Quran specifies that the punishment for that can be killing or crucifying or amputation of the hand and foot on opposite sides. These are all barbaric things, and beheading is actually milder than some of these others.
Well, good point. But is this a trend? I mean, we've seen by the count that I saw in a news report, 7 so far this year, 87 last year.
Yeah, it's just par for the course. 7 this year is quicker, is more than usual, but this is something they've always done. It's in accord with their constitution, with their image of themselves, with their proclamation as being the guardians and the truest exponents of Islam.
These are supposed to be reasonable people, though, and people talk about Sharia law. For instance, in the finance sector, they talk about Sharia law being a good thing, and, you know, conservative, if you will. Not the case.
No. The thing about it is that these things are not separable. And when you're talking about Sharia finance, the West has been quite hospitable to it. And all these banks, international banks, have Sharia finance boards, and they have these elaborate stratagems whereby they enable Muslims not to pay interest and so on. And these things are all considered to be good parts of good aspects of the whole multiculturalist enterprise. But the reality is that Sharia is one entity, and once you start accommodating it, you're just opening the door to accommodating more of it. The financial aspects are not separable from these punishments of amputation and beheading and so on, crucifixion, that are mandated for various crimes. So the West actually, especially in the finance sector, is setting a very bad precedent by accommodating Sharia finance, because it's only opening the door to accommodation of other aspects of Sharia in the future. And there have already been and will be more calls for just that in the West.
I hadn't made that connection, but now you say it, it makes perfect sense, because we just had that case of a guy creating a website who gets 1,000 lashes and 10 years in jail for creating a website. Where is that in any ancient writings by Muhammad?
Oh, absolutely. It's very much in there. Actually, he was considered to have insulted Islam, and so the Saudis are being lenient on him by giving him these 1,000 lashes. They could, within their rights, according to Islamic law, put him to death. Just as the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists were put to death by the gunmen in Paris because they had insulted Islam. Well, both consider it's just part of Islamic law.
Well, true. Yeah, your point is excellent. I mean, we haven't heard Saudi Arabia speak out, to the best of my knowledge, about what's happened in France.
No, what can they say? This is Islamic law. This is what they do. This is something that is in accord with the teachings of Islam. The thing about it is that when you have these kinds of atrocities, the common response from Saudi Arabia, from the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, from international Islamic entities, is to call for restrictions on the freedom of speech. They want to use the things like the shooting in Paris to compel the West, intimidate the West, really, into clamping down on free expression and criminalizing criticism of Islam. They don't want to apologize for these attacks. They want to eradicate the cause of these attacks, which is our speaking freely.
Okay, now, the thing is, Saudi Arabia has oil, and you can't exactly sanction them without cutting off the rest of the world from oil, or can you? Because we currently have sanctions against Russia.
Yeah, you know, I don't think it's impossible. I think that it has not been done, but not because it could not be done. The Bush family had very close ties to the Saudis. Obama, of course, very famously bowed to the King of Saudi Arabia. Both administrations have shown no interest, really, in pursuing the Saudi connection to jihad terror, the Saudi propagation of the jihad terror ideology all over the world, and the oil connection is just keeping us hamstrung in this way. George W. Bush, right after 9/11, should have instituted an all-out effort to free us from dependence on Saudi oil and to, you know, offshore drilling and pipelines and fracking, everything that could be done. It should have been done then, but it still hasn't been done now all these years later.
Yeah, and indeed, the Saudis are still pulling the strings as far as prices are concerned. I guess this is the source of conspiracy theorists as much as anything else, that the Saudis were behind 9/11, for instance. Certainly the money came from Saudi Arabia and the wealth generated there.
There's a lot of unanswered questions about that. I mean, of course, everybody knows that 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudis, but there are also all these strange things, like the only planes in the sky on September 12, 2001, were taking relatives of the bin Laden family back to Saudi Arabia. I had a personal friend who was ill, and he was in the Mayo Clinic in September 2001, and he told me that the place was full of Saudis. There were all sorts of Saudis there getting treatment, and the morning of the 11th, he woke up, and all the Saudis had left before he turned on the news and saw what had happened. And then there's this Florida family that disappeared with food cooking on the stove, and they were Saudis, and they disappeared just on 9/11. The FBI has stonewalled about it, resisted all explorations, investigations of what actually went on there. There's so many strange questions that probably never will be answered. Of course, the Saudi section of the 9/11 Commission report was redacted for years, and most of it is still secret.
Robert, incredible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Robert Spencer joining us from Jihad Watch.